Welcome to this week's Wellness Wednesday. And this week we have a video specifically put together for those of you which have concerns about Christmas, New Year, holiday seasons, around what you should and shouldn't be eating. So if you're particularly on a diet, a restrictive program designed to support healing, how do you manage that during the holiday period? So I'm talking with Kirsty Cullen, who is Director of Nutrition here at the Optimum Health Clinic, to help you best navigate that. Hi Kirsty, welcome to the most important video of the year.
Absolutely. We should be wearing Christmas jumpers for this, I feel.
We should. Well, as you know, I wore my Christmas jumper to the Christmas party, but I don't have it with me.
Was enough.
Yeah, well, exactly. Once was enough. So I know there are people that are watching this that this a week before Christmas. I guess it's 7 days today that is Christmas Day. And others of different faiths may not celebrate Christmas, but they'll have various holidays where food can sometimes be a challenge. And particularly if people have kind of prided themselves in following a protocol, kind of dotting the I's, crossing the T's, and then are thinking, well, how do I deal with this with Christmas lunch and all of the temptations and treats and that sort of thing? So I know you've been asked this question quite a bit by your own patients in the last few weeks. So what do you tend to say to people about how important is it to stick perfectly to a protocol over the holiday period?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly have been asked this. And I have to say, I certainly have seen some postponements this week as well.
It seems to be a systematic issue every December in our nutrition department, doesn't it?
Ultimate denial. And I am a fun Grinch at Christmas. I think that's kind of the perception. But I think it's relatively easy to kind of hold basic core principles around Christmas. You know, I think that I stand by this 80-20 rule, where as long as the key principles are in situ, actually it is a time of year where, you know, okay, if you're on a strict protocol, not so much, but in the main, you should be able to relax and be in the moment and enjoy being with the family. And I think actually within the context of the traditional kind of festive meal, it's really easy to hold those principles. You know, you got lots of good veggies, you got a source of kind of, you know, good lean protein. And so the actual kind of Christmas meal in its traditional concept is relatively straightforward. And, you know, other sort of general meals around that would be too. Where we tend to fall down, of course, would be the refined sugars, the alcohol, this kind of necessity to eat in excess, as we kind of all have at this time of year.
Sorry, just to be clear, is it the Christmas pudding, the chocolate fudge pudding, the meringue? Which one was it you're talking about?
Yeah, all of those, generally. Yeah, absolutely. And it can be really difficult because you're surrounded by family and friends that are obviously enjoying that whole process. And the last thing you want to do is feel isolated from that. So, you know, I think the actual main Christmas meal is easy. I think it can be really, really useful to have some good alternatives without wishing to sound really horribly boring. But, you know, there are some great little alternatives you can have. I know at the clinic here, we have a gorgeous recipe for sort of a flourless orange cake, which is absolutely divine. We have some really lovely kind of cacao balls, sort of little bites that absolutely will kind of fill the gap really when it comes to treats and what have you. But the other thing I would say is I'm always, you know, talking to family or relatives who's saying, you know, Kirsty, how can I help? And this is where they can help. You know, if they're going to bring something for Christmas or for the holidays, then give them a little challenge of, you know, making gluten-free mince pies or, you know, whatever it may be that you need. And, you know, let them look after you in that way. And I think it's really important to allow family and friends to care for you. And this can be the perfect opportunity to do it.
It's a great opportunity, I think, people to practice asking for help, isn't it? Where people can get so used to not wanting to be an inconvenience and wanting to kind of maintain a facade of being self-reliant and not being difficult, whatever it may be. And it might be even sending them a recipe and saying, well, this is something that I think would be fine. I'd love to eat. And there's no pressure. But if you did feel like cooking it, I'd really appreciate it. And you might find that in doing that, that everyone ends up preferring your option to the other options. I've certainly seen that happen in the past.
Oh, I've definitely seen that happen. Yeah, absolutely.
And how you're saying, you know, the 80-20 principle. And I guess sometimes people hear that, and if they're perfectionists, then they're thinking, well, how can that possibly be the case, that I've been told that if I have any of this thing, it's going to make my SIBO or my candida or my inflammation or my blood sugar or whatever it may be, it's going to make that thing worse, therefore I mustn't ever have it. So maybe just say a few words about why actually sometimes, for example, when it comes to not creating sensitivities and that kind of thing, actually a more balanced approach can be really helpful.
Yeah, and I think, we often have the discussion, don't we, with clients about project recovery and about being absolutely crippled by being perfect about sort of what they can eat, what they should eat, etc., etc. And so there is a stress that comes with that, which is why, generally speaking, I work within this kind of 80-20 rule, so that there is an element of freedom there, which often helps with longer term compliance. So generally speaking, I would go with that rule. I wouldn't suggest Christmas is the time to kind of do an exclusion test and a reintroduction test necessarily. But, I do think, particularly as we're coming into kind of phase 2 recovery, there is a genuine need for testing the system a little bit at times to kind of see, how your resilience is built and, how far you've come. So there is room. Certainly, as you said, if someone's on sort of a strict SIBO diet and in phase 1, there potentially is a little less freedom there. But, hopefully you're working with a practitioner who's been able to offer you really good guidance in the run up to the kind of festive period and let you know perhaps, where there can be some freedoms and relaxation of those rules.
And I think it's also worth saying, if someone does slip, they fall off the wagon for a meal or for a day or for a couple of days, that it's highly unlikely to be any major crisis in their recovery process. It might be they have a slight raising of symptoms for a few days. It might be they don't, and that would be interesting information to get. But I think sometimes we can get to the point that we think, oh my God, if I have a little bit of gluten in the gravy, for example, or maybe you ate the gravy thinking there was no gluten, then found out there'd been something put in it, and then it's unlikely to be nothing terrible is likely to happen. And often our expectation of that and our nervous system reaction to the fear of that is actually far more damaging than the reality.
Yeah, absolutely. And at best, there won't be any response, which is great. At worst, okay, there may be some bloating or, some increase in one symptom, but actually you can make that correlation, and it's quite a useful clinical tool to be able to come back and report that in January. So I think you're right. It's about keeping that in context and sort of.
So what you're saying is people should eat whatever they want for Christmas so we can see what happens.
No, absolutely not. And I think also, and nobody ever wants to kind of verbalize it, that Christmas can be quite pressurized in many senses. There can be more activity, there can be more social interaction, more cooking, more energy requirements, more stress, more anxiety sometimes when the whole family gets together. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that, that might create a little bit of, extra energy spend on the body. So if we can kind of keep the core principles, fantastic, with a little bit of freedom to boot. I've also definitely said to clients this month, feel free to enjoy the family and enjoy the general sort of vibe around Christmas, but don't be frightened to say, okay, 2:00 now, I'm just going to go and take an hour out and get away from sort of the general hubbub and just let my system calm down and then come back and enjoy the rest of the evening. So setting expectations around that can be important without absolutely being a perfectionist and feeling tied to a protocol or a routine.
Yeah. And if it is the case that you are someone that you're super sensitive to foods, and if you don't get what you normally get, it is going to make you feel worse and ruin your Christmas. Equally, it's having the courage and the confidence to go and say, this is what I need, even if that means you take your own food pre-prepared and you serve it up with everyone else. But I think it's also it's loving yourself enough to go, if this is what you need to be able to enjoy it the best you can, that also be willing to stand up and make sure you have that.
Yeah, you'd be amazed how many requests I'd have in the last 4 weeks that kind of have a little glass of this or, a little tipple of that. And, I think you are master of your own recovery journey at the end of the day, and nobody is better than you to sort of assess how you're feeling and assess, kind of the freedoms that you want to put in place around the next few weeks.
And self-punishment is not a necessary ingredient of recovery as well.
Absolutely not. No.
Yeah. Good. Thank you, Kirsty. Hopefully people will enjoy their Christmas a little bit more thanks to your helpful words. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
I hope that video was helpful. We have an upcoming series of videos with Kirsty in January where we're going to be looking specifically at the adrenals and adrenal fatigue as part of recovery from fatigue. And tomorrow is the last episode of Everyday Alex of 2019. And as an addition to today's video, I'm going to be talking about how to support yourself, how to manage self-care during the holiday season, how to best look after yourself, but also make sure you get to have some fun, and also how to get your needs met by getting support from others as well. So I look forward to talking with you tomorrow.